equity, mate.
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.
G'day equity mates, welcome back to another episode. Following our journey as we learn to invest. Now, whether you're an absolute beginner or approaching Warren Buffett status, our aim is to help break down your barriers from beginning to dividend. Now, if you're joining us for the very first time, a massive welcome. Welcome to the Equity Mates community. Welcome to the journey of investing. If you're still getting up to speed, we suggest you go and check out our Get Started Investing podcast to get you all the basics and then come back and join us on this show. Now, while we are licensed, we are not aware of your financial circumstances. So please, any information on this show is for education and entertainment purposes. Any advice is general. But with that said, my name is Bryce. And as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How are you?
I'm very good, Bryce. Excited for this episode. We are bringing back a segment we launched earlier this year, Ask an Advisor. And we have a good friend and a great advisor, self-described great advisor.
One of Australia's leading.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, we know that financial advice is expensive, Ren, but over 70% of our community in our most recent survey said that they feel like they would benefit from having one. So the Ask an Advisor series is designed to bring the advisors to the Equity Mates community, to you, to give you the opportunity to ask your questions. And it is a pleasure to welcome to the Equity Mates studio, as we said, one of our friends, but a certified financial planner, Jacob McCudden. Welcome, Jaco.
Thank you, Bryce. Thank you, Ren. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So Jaco works at back-to-back financial planners and is well-versed in all things financial planning. And today we're going to be unpacking some things that Jaco reckons we get wrong, or what are some common misconceptions. Bit of a this or that game, and then closing out with community questions. We'll be looking at how to invest $10,000, how to pay off, should we be paying off HECs, plus many more. Now, Jaco, on your website, it says in your little bio description, financial planning is not all about managing money. It's really much more than that. It's about uncovering your clients' hopes, dreams, and unspoken fears and providing them with valuable guidance, counsel, and support when they need it most.
Before we get to the meat of the episode, I want to understand, how do you uncover your clients' hopes, dreams, and unspoken fears? Is it like, can you do it for Bryce? Get us, let's figure out what's going on in his head.
All right, we can that might be the easiest way to do it. Maybe just do a test run with Bryce.
Okay.
Right, Bryce, so you've come to see me. You've come in here wanting to talk about money, and I'm going to start the conversation by saying, let's not talk about any of that right now. What's important to you, Bryce? What are you trying to achieve here? What are your objectives? What are you hoping to get out of this? Don't worry about money, but what is the actual end game?
The actual end game is having complete control of my time and not having to wake up knowing that there's a commitment to earn a paycheck.
Okay. And why is that important?
Because time is the most valuable commodity we have.
Indeed. Indeed, you're not wrong. Okay, so it's all about time, getting time back. So having more control, what does that look like to you? What would that mean?
It genuinely would mean me waking up and being able to dictate my day hour by hour, not having to wake up and know that there's a calendar to go by or anything that has been in my calendar that I don't want to do.
Okay.
You basically just don't want a job.
That's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm hearing.
So where does it lead from there then? Like, how does that then translate into a financial plan?
And down the rabbit hole you go, because I think, and that kind of leads into what you started with, what is one of the big misconceptions, I think a lot of people come into a financial planner or advisor thinking we're only going to speak about money, that we're some sort of investment guru, that you come and see us and everything will be solved tomorrow, which obviously is not the case in any way, shape or form. And I like to start the conversation with, let's forget about money, because money's the means to an end, right? Money is kind of nothing in its own right. It's what's actually important to you about doing that. And of course, investments and building wealth and being smart with your tax and all this other stuff, they're ways to get there. But what are we actually trying to get to? It could be buying our first home. It could be helping our kids through private education or buying their first homes or being able to take that extra holiday in retirement or whatever it is. Because if we just focus on money and wealth, then we get a bit too stuck in the weeds. And that's what a good advisor or a good planner is there to help you do, to navigate that. But at the end of the day, it's really important with any kind of planning, not just financial planning. A personal trainer will probably do a very similar thing. They start with, what are you actually trying to get out of this? Is it I want to lose weight, or I want to get fit for a competition or whatever it is. So unless we're really clear on that objective up front, it's hard for us to make a plan, because the plan is what gets you from A to B, but we need to know what B is to begin with.
So I guess that's the biggest misconception when it comes to financial advice and financial planning. And that's probably a good segue into where we want to go to start this episode. For so many of the Equity Mates community, myself included, I think Bryce included, we've actually never stepped into a financial planner's office and had that initial meeting and gone through the process. And so I'm sure we all have heaps of misconceptions about what goes on and like how it all works. So what are some of the biggest ones you see, the biggest misconceptions, or I guess what do people get wrong when they approach you or another financial planner?
Yeah, really good question, Ren. I mean, one of the big obvious one is the sort of, you have to have a lot of money to be able to sort of get financial advice. A lot of people sort of think, well, you got to be wealthy, right, to get a financial planner, otherwise what's the point? But of course, that's not the case. You know, we can start with clients who are just starting out with, you know, not much going on in the way of finances, but it's about mapping out that journey over time. And we often say to clients, you know, if you're looking to sort of get rich quick, I'm not the person to see. But if you're looking to build wealth slowly over your working life, then let's have a chat.
Jaco, on that, like a lot of people probably hear you say that and they're like, but it is expensive to get a financial advisor.
This is the commercial reality, I suppose, of the industry. In a perfect dream world, which of course we don't live in, everybody would get financial advice and everybody would benefit from it. But of course, that's not the case. There is a cost of entry, and I think realistically, a lot of that is obviously driven by regulation and compliance. But you know, I'd have to say probably your minimum cost of entry point is probably these days somewhere in the realm of $2,000 to $3,000, which for most people where they're starting out, you know, that just may not be achievable, or it may not be economical. So we do have to be realistic, but sometimes that's generally the cost for a full financial plan, which is personal advice, very detailed, very comprehensive. But if we're not at that stage, and we do have to be realistic that not everybody's at that point, you know, we can still tackle it in other ways. It could just be a general consultation where we're providing more generalised advice, charging you for the hour or 2 hours or what have you. That might be, you know, $300, $400, something like that. So it's still not nothing, but it's a much more palatable cost. But of course, that's not giving you a detailed financial plan. That's more of a general sort of guidance, pointing you in the right direction. These are the kind of, you know, you're on the right track. We need to keep working on this. And in a few years' time, when we're kind of advice ready, we call it, you know, come and see me and we can start to tackle this. And part of being advice ready is also mentality. You've got to want to receive the advice. In that, you know, we are very much like a co-pilot. We're not in the driver's seat. You're in the driver's seat. So if you're thinking we're just going to take the wheel, that's not what we do. We advise you and give you counsel and guidance for you to be able to make informed decisions, because it's your money at the end of the day.
So just to make it clear, the $2,000 or $3,000 that you're paying for a detailed financial plan, is that a one-off, and then if I'm with you for 10 years, the subsequent 9 years, it's just the consultation fee?
Yeah, and it's a good question, Bryce. So it depends. Some clients, it would just be that one-off cost, and they might not need an ongoing relationship. They might not be in a position to be able to afford that, or it might just not be appropriate. Some people are pretty savvy with their money and sometimes just need help solving a specific problem, something that's a bit unusual. Maybe it's a tax issue, or there's been some sort of life event like a death or a divorce or a marriage or what have you, that they need advice around that moment, in which case there may be no ongoing costs from the financial advice perspective. You just pay for that as and if and when you need it. Others will benefit and engage with sort of an ongoing retainer sort of service where they're paying an annual fee. Wouldn't necessarily be quite as high as their one-off initial cost. It might be sort of 50, 60% of that, but they pay that ongoing, and that's for sort of more the ongoing relationship and the counsel and keeping the plan on track, so to speak. So clients who want a bit more support along the way, they may benefit from an ongoing review service. Clients who just need sort of ad hoc advice for specific things, or are a bit more savvy, they might benefit from just paying for it as they go. So we can kind of cater to any model. And I suppose the key difference with us, although more advice firms are doing this now, but 5 years ago it was sort of groundbreaking, is that we just charge a fixed fee to our clients. So basically, whatever we have to do, if there's a lot of work involved, we're going to obviously charge you more. If it's a little work, It'll be less. But we don't sort of charge percentage based on assets or things like that. It's not like you have to have a lot of money and then that's how your fees are paid or anything. We don't play that game. We just don't think that's the fairest or most transparent way to do it. because a very small percentage cost, which most people don't appreciate, can actually add up to be a very significant cost if not properly looked at. Whereas we just think, look, the fair approach is it's going to take us X to get the job done. Obviously, there is a profit margin for the business. We are a for-profit business at the end of the day. These are the costs we would have to charge you to make that economical. But also, I believe that firmly puts our interest in line with the client. We make our money from the fees we charge our clients for the services we provide them. So we want to do a good job at that to retain our clients and making sure they're getting ahead and seeing the progress they're making. Because, of course, if we're not demonstrating value, what's the point? And I agree with that. If we're not bringing the value, what are we doing?
So, Jaco, Bryce, very exciting life moment for him coming up. He and Harriet are looking at buying their first house, and I'm sure that is a very common, client type that you see walk through your doors. So what do people get wrong when they're in Bryce's position looking to buy their first house, and how do you steer them?
Yeah, look, probably the first thing I see a lot of is that what we're going to pay for the house, so what our price range is driven by what the bank's going to lend us. So, let's not forget, the bank is in the core business of lending money. That is how they make money. And if there was no government regulation, they'd be giving out loans left, right and centre. So often when you're getting knocked back by the bank or they're paying less than you thought, it's not because of them. It's because they have to apply certain prudent obligations to make sure they're lending responsibly. And that falls on the bank, not the borrower. But even then, there's what the bank will lend, which in my view is perhaps somewhat irrelevant to what is actually affordable and right for you. So it doesn't mean we have to take it right to the limit. It doesn't mean we have to do nowhere near it. It just means it's a factor, but it shouldn't be driving the whole decision. We shouldn't just be going, well, the bank will lend this, so therefore we can buy a property for that. So that's our price range. No. We need to look at our budget and go, well, how does that affect our other goals and objectives? Because the more we borrow, the more those repayments are going to be. And then, of course, the less resources we have for other things like investment portfolio or super or whatever it is.
I was talking about this last night. It's actually a massive surprise to me. I don't know if surprise is the right word, but it was alarming.
It's disappointing.
It's disappointment, yeah. Because I found this out when we started the journey of getting pre-approval and those sorts of things. The way in which you're delivered information on what your borrowing capacity is versus the way you're delivered information on can you actually afford this is completely different, and it's bullshit. And I think it leads to people seriously over leveraging themselves to the point where you can understand why people are getting into trouble with this mortgage cliff at the moment. But the conversation is not around let's start with your cash flow and figure out what you can afford to pay. It's let's start with multiplying your combined income by an arbitrary 5 times and telling you that that's how much you can borrow. It's the difference between what you can borrow and what you can afford to pay is two completely different things.
Yeah, and I'm not sure sort of how far in the process you are, but I'd say from my view, and I've obviously done it myself as well, but it's quite transactional, and you don't kind of get all the information to really make a proper decision at the start. You're drip-fed little bits and pieces. It's buried in some massive contract. It's all very opaque. But the problem with that, I suppose, at the end of the day, the bank, that's their business. They're there to sell loans and to have loans. That's how part of the way they make money. And even with using a mortgage broker, which I fully support, again, they're there to help broker that deal and get you a good deal. But what neither of those parties are doing, but a financial planner can assist you with, is more, let's look at the strategy here. What's actually the right kind of amount of debt for us? And do we want to be taking out a 30-year mortgage and taking 30 years to pay it off? Does that actually align with because that's what it will be if we just go to the bank. But if we want to be debt free in 15 years, or we want to start building stuff for our kid, our future kids or whatever in 10 years, we need to plan all that out. And that's where comprehensive personal advice is, even if it's $2 or $3 grand to get it done, it should be seen as an investment, because we're not just planning for the next 6 months. We're potentially planning for the next 5, 10, 30 years around long-term savings in our super, making sure we're going to pay our home loan off in time, be debt-free, all these kind of goals and objectives. So I think having that holistic view and actually strategically planning it through before we do the deal is worth the time, because for most people, for many of us, probably everybody on this call, is that it's probably the biggest expense we're ever going to have, the interest on that home loan. So spending, a few months or a few hours to put the effort in and get it right can make a massive difference over a 20-year sort of loan or whatever.
What about once you actually buy the house? A lot of chat about buying your first home, and maybe we're just not in that world yet, but what about the managing it ongoing,
More
offset
repayments.
accounts, surprise costs, all that stuff? What should Bryce be thinking about once he actually holds his little paddle up at the auction and nails the place?
Yeah. What is it called? Drawdowns or withdraw?
I don't know. Ask Jaco.
Yeah. I mean, so a couple of things, I suppose. The first thing is buying and selling homes, apart from the first home, even though that said, it's still a cost. It's expensive business, right? You've got conveyancing costs, you've got potentially agent costs, you've got stamp duty being a massive one for most people after they probably exhausted the first home concession. So you don't want to be chopping and changing homes probably any more frequently than say 5 years, because there's a lot of costs involved in those transactions. So if your heart's not fully in it and you're not fully sold on that property, don't buy it. Don't rush into that massive decision unless you are fully sure that you could see yourself living here for at least kind of 5 years minimum, in my view. Now, that might change. Life happens and things might have to change. But if we go into it with that idea, that's probably going to hold us in better stead than rushing in and just feeling the pressure of the auction. Oh, okay, I'll put in another bid. We don't want to be pushed into a big decision like that. Once we're in and once we've got the loan all sorted and so on, something I see, I suppose, is you can get, I guess, just your no-frills basic loans, and they'll typically have the cheapest interest rate, but they don't have any of those bells and whistles like the offset accounts and sometimes not even redraw and all the rest of it. For most people, though, that's probably fine. I mean, offsets are a great tool, but if we're not really going to be using them, we're probably going to be paying a premium, because often those additional features like offset accounts and the ability to redraw and so on, whilst sometimes they'll charge an annual fee for them, often it's more reflected in a slightly higher interest rate. And it might only be 10 basis points, 15 basis points. So the average Joe, it doesn't seem like much. But again, that sort of margin over potentially a 30-year mortgage could literally be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars over the life of the full loan. People really struggle wrapping their head around just the exponential nature of compound interest. And when you're on the receiving end of that, when you've borrowed money, it can be a significant cost. So it's all well and good to have those offsets and so on, and they're a good tool to help manage loans and so on. But we've got to be thinking ahead and going, are we actually going to need this stuff? Are we really going to use it? Because we can always refinance down the track and get them later.
So what about superannuation, particularly for people our age? What's something that we get wrong or a common misconception?
Look, I think for a lot of people, I'm always quite surprised when particularly younger clients come in and they just have literally no idea. Zero. And now that's not their fault. Like, to be fair to them, it's barely spoken about in school, if at all. I mean, a lot of people come out of high school and they've got a tax file number but have no idea about taxes. They don't understand super. Most of them, if they're going into uni, also don't understand HECs and so on, or help debt and how that's going to work. They think it's just, I can enroll in whatever and it doesn't cost me anything. But all of these things obviously have a cost. So coming back to super, just a complete lack of understanding. It's a bit of a black hole, like money goes in, I don't even pay attention to it. But the thing is, as we know, with long-term investing, the sooner we do something about it, even if it's just minor improvements, very small improvements, over that long term can be massive differences. So things
such as what?
So, just being in a bad fund. I've just been in the fund that my employer put me in for the last 10 years, never looked at it. I mean, half of the time we can immediately get an improved result for the client in lower fees and better returns by just moving to what I would say is a fairly average or standard fund, but they're just in some crappy old fund that some employers set up and they've just never thought about it. But you ask them, if you had 10,000, 20, 50,000 in a bank account, you'd be paying attention to it. You've probably got that amount, if not more, in your super fund and you don't even look at it.
What's one of your favourite super funds?
I won't get that specific, but I mean, there's a lot of good ones out there. There is a lot of good ones out there, and you'd know them all. You would have seen them, you would have heard of them, you would know them. But that said, there's also a lot of duds.
Like?
Yeah, what are some duds? Name and shame.
More recently, the government's done this. They're now making them mandatory reporting on their returns and things. And the low-performing funds have to identify themselves to the client, i.e. the member, send them a letter saying, we've been identified as a crap fund, so you know. And clearly, the member's probably going to take that and go, I need to do something about this. And that was in response to the government recognising that members were fairly apathetic about it. But if the fund had to tell them you are in a bad fund by the government's own fairly generous definition, they're probably more likely to get out of that fund. And we're seeing a lot of fund consolidation, which I don't mind. So I don't want, we don't want an industry where it's just two or three massive funds. But, 10 or 15, that's fine. The 50 or 60 we've got, it's too many. And as you guys would know, a lot of these big funds, they take really big positions in big projects for long time periods. They need scale. And if you don't have scale, if you're a tiny little fund with a few $100 million, it's not enough to effectively manage that money. Whereas we're in a fund with billions of dollars, with solid inflows and all the rest of it, you can get access to investment options and things that those other smaller funds can't. And your members will be rewarded for that. So there is definitely a shared benefit for everybody in the fund to be in a larger fund, generally speaking.
Well, Jaco, we've got a little bit of a game, this or that, and then on the other side of the break, we want to get to some questions from the community, including one around paying off your HECs and should you be paying it off faster, which I know is front of mind for a lot of people with indexation at the moment. But let's get to this game called This or That. Quick fire, we're going to give you two options. You choose which one you prefer.
Okay.
Give us a quick reason why. Or don't, up to you.
No fence sitting.
Okay, all right.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So we'll start with what is obviously a big question for a lot of young people who are thinking about the money they're saved and how they want to deploy it. Property or shares?
For investment purposes?
Yeah.
Shares.
Well, certainly not for living purposes because shares are terrible accommodation.
For what?
No, it's definitely shares. 100% shares.
Oh, really? Okay.
Nice.
That was more strident than I expected. Why?
So in my mind, I'm thinking investment property is the alternative.
Yeah.
Don't like them for a lot of reasons. One, that common perception properties always go up. Obviously, they do not. Two, we're normally over leveraged because just of the nature of the property value. We have to borrow so much to get it. And it's just no diversification. It's one property in one city, in one suburb, on one street. And if one little thing changes, that's totally out of our control. That could be the end game. Government wants to build a nuclear power plant the suburb over. That could be the end of that property's value. So I don't like them for that reason, whereas shares, and not specifically direct shares, but equities perhaps is a better word, highly diversified, easily, low cost, easily managed, don't even have to think about it, no issues with tenants leaving, and just high diversification, instant diversification over potentially thousands of companies. And bite-sized chunks.
I don't think I've met anyone who loves a Vanguard product more than Jaco.
I don't know. Simon outside might give him a run for his
Simon
running
loves
money.
Vanguard as well. All right, next one.
We don't need to overcomplicate it. Keep it simple.
This or that, pay off debt or invest the money?
Depends what kind of debt it is. If it's consumption debt, we're talking credit cards and personal loans, definitely debt. If it's investment debt, then go the other way, invest, potentially even borrow more.
Nice.
Nice, all right. Invest in super or outside of super?
Depends on your time frame, I suppose. But if time frame is
Okay, let's say at our age.
again, depends on your time frame. If it's a long-term investment, if the investment term aligns with the super access term, i.e. I'm not going to need it until I'm at least 60, then 100% super. You will not get a better tax deal in this country. Nothing your accountant could construct in the Cayman Islands that would beat superannuation. But of course, we can't get that money back. So if access and liquidity is more important outside of super, and we just pay more tax on it. But if we know that we're not going to need that for 30 years or 20 years or 10 years or whatever, 100% super.
On that point, so right now you can start to access your super when you're 60 and then like the full preservation age or access age or whatever is 65.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but like that's gone up over time. And when you're advising clients who are in their 20s and 30s, like no one thinks it's going to stay there, or at least I certainly don't. What do you guys like? What would you tell someone who's sort of 30 and you're saying now if you don't want to access it until you're 60, but like what will that be when we're older?
Good question. So at the moment, for simplicity, it's basically 60 at the earliest if you've retired, or 65, doesn't matter if you're still working or not. But already the age pension age is pretty much 67. It's still in its transition window, but it will be 67 very soon. So I think it's a bit of a no-brainer that 65 will very soon in time become 67, because it typically used to match the 65. So the age pension one's gone up, but the super one hasn't. So I think they'll just notch that to 67. By the time we get to that age, if I was a betting man, I'd say there's a very good chance it'd be more like 70. Because of course we're working longer and all the rest of it. So, and of course the government's only giving you all these massive tax breaks because they're trying to incentivise you to save for retirement. Hence why they're so restrictive on the rules that if we're going to give you all these tax deals, you ain't getting that money back until retire or until they do something silly like let people whip money out for nothing. But we probably won't see that again.
Nice.
Not with the pandemic, but anyhow.
And Jaco, final one: bombers or swans?
Oh, is there a third option? If I had to pick one, I'm going to say swans, just because I'm New South Wales, and also I'll pick any non-Victorian club over Victorian club.
You live in the
Nice.
ACT.
Pretty much New South Wales, right?
Jump on the bandwagon, Jaco. Yeah, Jaco lives in the ACT but supports Brisbane.
Who I'm going to see on Saturday, who are playing here against GWS. Woohoo.
Oh, nice.
True.
Nice.
Great.
After the break, we've got a couple of questions from the Equity Mates community. As Renz has alluded to, a lot of them around HECs and how to invest sort of $10,000, just to get your thoughts. So we're going to get stuck into that straight after this break. All right, Jaco. So we encourage the Equity Mates community to send in questions as part of the Ask an Advisor series. As we said at the top, advice is expensive. We're bringing the advisors straight to the community. So to kick it off, first question: how would you think about investing just a $10,000 chunk of money?
Okay. And of course, everything I'm discussing is totally general. So it's not personal advice in any way, shape or form. Probably need a bit more information than that, but just straight off the top of my head, if it was just $10,000 for something longer term and I didn't want to be actively involved with it at all, I would be going a broad-based, probably depending on the investment term, likely higher growth index fund. Generally through an ETF would be the simplest way to access it.
And I guess the follow-up to that would be all at once, or how would you advise?
Yeah, like lump sum,
Like
dollar
it's-
cost average.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes we talk about dollar cost averaging. I think the jury's out on that, to be honest, if we look at the actual data as to whether that's successful or not. If I had a lump sum, if markets were particularly volatile at the time, maybe I'd break it down a little bit. But in that example, I'd be more inclined to get the 10,000 invested straight away, and then I'd be sticking to some sort of, if we can, regular investment thing, maybe $100 a month or whatever to keep that going. That's your ongoing dollar cost averaging.
So, Jaco, one that we've alluded to before and is certainly top of mind for a lot of people, it's actually really front of mind, and it kind of pisses me off a lot because somehow Bryce has managed to pay his HECs off before me, and I still have HECs debt. And so when I look at our zero, he's actually taking home more pay than me, even though we have the same salary. It grinds my gears. So I guess the question for me, indexation. I'm not sure what it got indexed at, but because inflation is high, everyone's HECs debt rose a fair bit, or more than it has over the previous few years. Is that a reason to pay our HECs debt off faster, or what's the strategy and the thinking around HECs?
In my view, no, not at all. I might have a bit of a rogue view on this perhaps, but the indexation doesn't bother me at all. I don't think there's, in my view, unless you've got money coming out of your ears, there is no benefit in repaying that loan sooner. And if you've got other commitments that should come first, they should all take priority over the HECs debt. Reason being, there is no interest, right? It's an interest-free loan from the government. So you can't do better than that. People get hung up on this indexation, but as perhaps you guys would understand, and I'm sure many of your listeners would, that it's nothing. If inflation is 2% and my loan's being indexed at 2%, it's exactly the same. So and I put that another way, if my investment is returning 6%, but inflation is at 3%, my investment is only returning 3%. So we work that out as what we call the real cost. So you take off the indexation away from it. So the other benefit with HECs, of course, is there's no mandatory repayments other than your income. So if you're on hard times and you've lost your job and whatever, those HECs repayments will stop. They're not going to come out. And they only get higher and higher as your income gets higher, which I guess when you think about it from a more kind of way off left field here, but from a bigger societal view, these loans were extended to help people get education, to get jobs and become productive members of society and can contribute. And only if they're generating that income will they be asked to repay the loan. I think that's fair enough. Ideally, it could, one could argue it should be free as a total investment better system, because if you said, all right, well, let's sack HECs, if there's still going to be loans, it'll go totally private and we'll be ending up in a US type scenario where you're dealing with a commercial lender. You're making repayments payments whether you got income or not, and you're paying an actual interest rate on that loan, which will be higher than the true cost of money by inflation. Now, people are getting hung up because inflation's obviously been quite high recently, so the indexation is going to be a lot higher than normal, but that's not going to happen all the time. You know, you look back at what it was, and one could make the argument that, sure, it's going to go up quite a bit now, but go back to COVID times, it probably didn't go up by much at all, if any, because inflation was nothing. We're in slight deflation for a bit there. So, I mean, it goes both ways. But no, I don't think, unless that's the only thing left, only debt left, and we've covered everything else, that's only when I'm looking at making extra HECs repayments.
I assume the one exception would be if the money that you would take to pay off your HECs debt, you're just blowing on nights out and stuff like that.
That's totally different.
The assumption is that money is going to pay down other debt or being invested.
Correct. Exactly right, Red. Exactly right.
Yeah, nice. Well, then I should probably stop going out on nights out and pay off my HECs debt.
or how about this? Equity mates just pay you nothing, and then you won't have to make any extra payments.
Don't give Bryce any ideas.
Yeah, I just reduce the salary. Hold on.
This is why you need a financial advisor.
All right, Jaco. So we've got the final one that's come in from the community. What are some of the consistent strategies that you see some of your longer-term, wealthier clients put in place?
Look, the things that I'd say, like the clients who are doing well, who are doing the best sort of outcomes, are ones who get the simple stuff right. They get the basics right. They've got a budget, and they're not big spenders. They're not out there just wasting money. They know money has a value. They've worked hard for their money, so they're smart with it. And they consciously choose to sort of forgo things today to put money aside for the future. That's the first. If you can't do that, there's very little we can do. But once you get to that point, once you've got those good savings habits and you're starting to go, okay, I'm building up the savings. Now what can I do? That's the next part. They're always looking to do something else. They don't just rest on their laurels and go, oh, we'll just pay off the mortgage, just put it onto the mortgage, nice and simple. Maybe that's the best thing. Maybe it's not. But they're open to going, well, should we consider investing? Should we consider maybe even borrowing more money, which sometimes sounds counterintuitive? Should we consider doing a bit of extra into super, or perhaps some combination of all of the above? Yeah. So they never just sit back and go, happy with that. They are always looking for the next sort of strategy or way to keep improving their position over time. And then probably lastly, they're realistic. They know it ain't going to happen in a year or 2 years or honestly even 5. It's going to take 10, 20, 30 years. But they have faith in the plan and the strategy. And if they stick to this, they just can rest easy and know that once I get to retirement or whatever the goal is, if I stick to this plan, it's going to get me to where I need to go. So then I don't have to sweat the small stuff.
One thing you mentioned there, Jaco, at the start of that answer was they have a budget. I'm interested to know how you think about budgets, how you advise your clients on budgets. Do you have like a preferred method that you try and get all of your clients to do? Or if someone comes in and they just have no grasp on their spending and stuff like that, how do you approach it?
Yeah, good question. Do we have a sort of a way that we do it? No. And I think the issue with that is when you try and force a set way on people, they're not going to stick to it, they're not going to follow it, and the whole thing doesn't eventuate anyway. So what was the point? You've got to find the way that works for them. And for some clients, that's the old, getting out the Excel spreadsheet. They're really detailed. They're tracking everything down to the cent. And to be honest, I'm one of those kind of people. But that's me. That's what works for me, right? Whereas others, they kind of do the complete opposite and they just work it back. We go, okay, well, you hear them say pay yourself first. So it's like, well, we put you on a budget. Here's your $200, $300 a week each or whatever it is. Spend that on whatever you want. I don't care. Knock yourself out. But that's all you're getting because all this other stuff, that's our mortgage, that's our saving, that's our regular savings plan, that's a bit of extra salary sacrifice for super or whatever. So you make them kind of just work around the fixed points, if that makes sense. Whereas if you try and get those kind of clients to create them, it doesn't really happen because any extra cash just gets spent. But if you sort of cut them back and go, right, it's like you got a pay cut, you just got to live with this, they can start to find a way forward. So you've got to be flexible and you've got to just be able to learn your client and understand them and ask them how they manage money and all this sort of stuff, and then make a view on, well, what do I think is probably the best way to get them to do it? And that might change over time. But at the end of the day, you've got to have some sort of system, something, I believe. And I mean, technology is so good these days. A lot of the time you can get it's built into your NetBank app and so on. So it's tracking your expenditure. And that's
don't get me started on CommBank's spend tracking.
Not that one. Not that one in particular, but there are others. If nothing else, as a bare minimum, at least that is something.
Final question was, is there a moment or a strategy that you look back on and you're like, wow, that was amazing, or that really surprised me?
Ooh. Yeah, it's probably been a few of those. I'm trying to think of like what would be a good one. I mean, like I'm in Canberra, so we've had a lot of clients who have been sort of related to the public service and had some of those older superannuation schemes that are not available anymore. I've been pretty surprised sometimes with the outcome of those in terms of how simple changes to effectively a formula can result in a huge difference in someone's retirement benefit. They've been particularly surprising. But others, I think, are probably just the change in clients. Like I've definitely had some clients where at the start I'm thinking, I don't know if I can get these guys across the line. I know where they want to go, but I just don't think they're going to be able to get with the program. And then, a couple of years go by and then 3 or 4 years go by and you go, actually, geez, wow, they're starting to get it now. So some clients get it straight away, others take a few years. But when you start to see those kind of people, saying back to you the sort of values and ideas you've been telling them the whole time. And it's almost a bit like in the later stages there, you say to them, you remember why we're doing this? And they'll explain back to you exactly why they were doing it. That because we got the tax deduction and X, Y, and Z. It feels quite fulfilling that you go, okay, you guys are getting it now because that's it. We're not there to just do it for you. We're here to help you understand and empower you. And if in 5 years you know as much about it as I do, my job is done.
Yeah. Love it. Well, Jaco, if anyone listening from the Equity Mates community wants to touch base with you and perhaps use your services, what's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, thanks, Bryce. Probably the easiest place would just be our website, which, just Google back-to-back financial planners, or the website's just back-to-backfp.com.au. You'll see on there a bit of information about us, everything you need to know, our bios and so on that Bryce read out earlier. And if you'd like to get in touch, obviously our contact details are out there. You can just drop an inquiry on the website. And we can take it from there.
And to my eternal disappointment, there is no photo of Jaco on the website back-to-back with another advisor.
True.
But I will keep lobbying for that to get up there.
Branding opportunity.
I've got to say, such a photo exists, but it is not on the website.
Epic. Now, Jaco, each year we run the Equity Mates Media Awards, and one of the awards is Expert of the Year, and you are automatically in the running by appearing on the show as part of our expert interviews. Now, it's voted for by the community at the end of the year, but to help them understand a little bit more about you, we would love to know, if you were to win the glass trophy, beautiful glass trophy, where would you be putting it?
I'd probably have to put another shelf up or something in here.
What, with all your other awards?
Right back there, so it's visible anytime I'm doing a video call.
Perfect.
Nice.
Perfect. Right under the certification. Love it, Jaco. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Really appreciate you taking it. And I know that, the community would have got a lot out of that. We covered a lot of ground. Make sure you check out the website if you would like to know more about the services Jaco and his organisation provide. But we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
No worries, Bryce, friend. Thank you guys so much. Pleasure to be here.
And just a reminder, if you can please rate and review, leave 5 stars, that would be really appreciated. It's a tiny thing that you can do for us, but it does have a huge impact. Coming up this week, we have the IG Psychology of Money series closing out with the 3rd episode tomorrow. But Alec will be doing the 2nd episode with his mentor, Andrew Page, on Monday, and we're off to the US.
Can't wait.
You have been listening to an Equity Mates Media production. In the spirit of reconciliation, Equity Mates Media acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. This podcast is intended for education and entertainment purposes. Any advice is general advice only and has not taken into account your personal financial circumstances, needs, or objectives. Before acting on general advice, you should consider if it is relevant to your needs and read the relevant product disclosure statement. And if you're unsure, please speak to a financial professional. The hosts of this podcast and their guests may have positions in the companies mentioned. Equity Mates Media operates under an Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.